Hey, everybody. Welcome to episode 89 of High Spirits. I'm Ben Larson, and with me, as always, is Anna Ray Grabstein. We're recording Thursday, May 22nd, 2025, and there's been absolutely no news this week. Just kidding. We'll get there in just a bit. We have a great show for you today. We have Marc Hauser coming on, the purveyor of cannabis musings. Lots of opinions and topics, and we'll cover a bunch. But before we get there, Anna Ray, how are you doing?
I am so good. This recording today is my last stop before I head out on a cruise to Mexico with my dad and my son and my brother.
Ooh.
All of us
Very
will have
nice.
businesses. Yeah. I'm really
Where
excited.
in Mexico are we going?
We are just going to Ensenada. It's really so my son is calling it a party boat and my dad is calling it a booze cruise. I have not figured out what I'm calling it yet. Probably neither of those for me, somewhere in the middle. But we're leaving from San Francisco. It's just a local weekend getaway. We'll cruise out under the Golden Gate Bridge during sunset and just I don't know, partake whatever fun adventures happen on this floating hotel that will be careening south through the Pacific Ocean.
That sounds lovely. And you're
Excited.
and they're right. It is a booze cruise. I think I might have been on that voyage before.
I definitely have a cannabis strategy that I won't be talking about on air because I don't want to be breaking any rules. But my plan is to exercise every day, eat edibles every day, laugh and smile, and maybe have one or two deep conversations along the way.
Well,
And read. I'm going to read too.
I hope no cruise line executives are watching this show for your sake.
Yeah, exactly. And other fun things that happened outside of cannabis is, but cannabis adjacent. I think everything Grateful Dead is sort of cannabis adjacent. And, we've got a new mayor in San Francisco, Daniel Lurie, and he's been really active on social media, sharing kind of everything that he's been up to. And one of the things that he's announced over the past few weeks is that Dead and Company, which is sort of what's still hanging on in the Grateful Dead these days, is doing a 3-day run for their 60th anniversary in Golden Gate Park in San Francisco in August. So I signed up for pre-sales for that as well. So if anyone wants to come party with me in Golden Gate Park in August, you let me know because I will be there.
They might have to retitle the name of the brand to the Grateful Not Dead.
Oh,
sorry, is that sacrilege? I don't know.
I don't know, but you just gotta just keep an open mind about these things. What's going on in your world, Ben?
Nothing. It's been a week. Texas voted on SB3, which we'll get to in a little bit. But yeah, just business as usual, just active and really doing all the things. Funny story though. Again, cannabis adjacent. I was juggling a lot yesterday. I had my Vistage meeting. I had dad duties shortly thereafter, but I was trying to squeeze in some meetings, and so I was picking up Alistair from school and was going to take him to Kung Fu, and I hopped on with a new contact. We'll call him Mr. Jackson, and we were jamming on the industry and all the things that lay ahead, and it was really lovely conversation. I was able to transition Alistair to Kung Fu while having this call. And then I'm like, all right, I'm just going to walk around this neighborhood. And so I find myself walking around, some nice homes in Alamo. And I talking to Mr. Jackson. And all of a sudden I look up at the street sign, and I was at the intersection of South Jackson Way, North Jackson Way, and Jackson Way. It was a 3-way intersection, which we'll talk to the civil engineer about their creativity of street naming, but I was just like one of those serendipitous moments. I was like broke out in laughter, had goosebumps. I'm like, whoa, the universe works in really strange ways. And by universe, maybe I mean simulation. Who knows? But yeah, that was my moment of Zen yesterday while the hearing for the Senate Bill 3 vote was occurring. So
Yeah. Well, we'll talk all about that. And I know that with your business being in both hemp and cannabis, that's going on in hemp has a big impact on your team and clients and things. So I'm sure you're watching it really closely.
Quite
Uh,
closely. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, on the work front with me, I'm just plugging along. It's been busy, but feeling grateful for all of that and getting ready for some conferences that are coming up. Benzinga is on the ticket. There is a lawyers event that I'll be speaking at in Denver. So yeah, all those things. But I think
nothing like surrounding yourself with a bunch of lawyers. That sounds like fun.
oh well, we're bringing one on right now. Let's introduce them. So we're going to introduce Marc and bring him on to talk through news with us because he often remarks on news through his newsletter, Substack, Cannabis Musings. Marc Hauser is a widely respected voice in cannabis, and he's a local friend, also lives in Petaluma like me. He is formerly chair of the cannabis practice at Reed Smith, and he was longtime personal deal counsel to investor Sam Zell at the Equity Group. He has overseen billions in capital markets and M&A deals and currently serves as chief of staff at Hardin, a leading cannabis dispensary in Vegas, and he teaches law at both Northwestern and UNLV. So let's bring Marc on to include him in our conversation today. Thanks for joining, Marc.
Good morning. Though I'm already thinking of walking because of Ben's pun about the Grateful Dead. I think Jerry Garcia is turning over in his grave from that one.
Well, you've got a Grateful Dead poster
Grateful
in the
not
background,
dead.
so you must be a fan also.
Oh yeah, there it is.
Oh, okay.
There you go.
So
Yeah,
our
he's gonna come
off-color
back
vote.
and haunt you for that. So
I should have
yeah,
checked the wall before I made that joke.
Well, so
I'm thrilled to be here. I'm a big fan of the podcast, and I'm a big fan of the two of you. So
oh, thanks, Marc. We like fans. Well, so I think we should just jump right into the news, and then we're going to have a conversation with you about the industry. But Ben, will you give us an update on what's going on in Texas and start us off there?
Yeah, so it's been a very busy legislative session. Texas was oscillating between this booming hemp industry. I think the lieutenant governor identified it as an $8 billion marketplace, which would peg it slightly larger than how much alcohol they sell in the state. And that same lieutenant governor decided it was a good idea to just completely outright ban everything. He'll argue it's not everything. CBD isolates and CBG isolates are still okay, but pretty much everything else. And so there was a lot of efforts over the last several months to find a middle ground, or kill the bill, all of which in short basically failed last night. And what really happened was that the lieutenant governor single-handedly took it upon himself to leverage teachers and their wages and a funding bill for the schools in exchange for a complete ban on THC. And so against the desires of many businesses, many consumers, many veterans, many patients, did something that we all generally know doesn't work and forced prohibition. And now their pressure release valve, their moral high ground is that, oh, well, they have teacup, but teacup is woefully inaccessible to.
And say what teacup is.
yeah,
Sorry, teacup is the Texas Compassionate Use Program. It's a very limited cannabis program. There's 3 licensees, I think 2 that are active, and they basically, I mean, it's just, they're very limited. I think there's like 8,000 patients or something like that for the entire state of Texas. And now there's a bill on the docket that hasn't been passed, but would increase this. And they said this in the hearing last night by 10x. Well, what's 10x of the existing thing? So it's like, okay, maybe that opens it up to 80,000 patients of the state of Texas. And maybe that creates 10 licensees or 30 licensees. Like, is that enough to serve the state of Texas? Probably not. And so are people going to be able to have access to THC? Yes, they will. Will it be through teacup? Who knows? Will it be through the illicit market? Most likely. And where's Texas next to? Mexico. So yeah, bring back the conversations, the border walls and the cartels and all that. So yeah, it was a busy week. Last night was fun. Last night did start the previous morning, so there was an entire day of session where the SB3 being brought to the floor kept getting postponed. It was supposed to be 10 then 10 a.m. yesterday morning, and then it got postponed all the way till 6 p.m. So as you can imagine, there was a lot of politicking happening behind the scenes, a lot of horse trading, and this is just politics. It's not the will of the voters.
You know, Texas is one of those markets that has been basically very opposite to the way that the other markets have developed. There has a lot of the other medical markets have started with a medical program and then have quickly been able to transition and figure out a path forward for moving to adult use. And we're so far from that in Texas. And there is a tremendous opportunity to serve consumers in Texas, but it doesn't really seem like there's anything on the docket that is going to open it up in a way that would really do anything other than create a massive illicit opportunity. And I think about this, and I think about all of the businesses that started in Texas that were trying to do the right thing and that were open to regulations through some type of legislative fix. And I'm sad for those entrepreneurs because it doesn't seem like there's really options for them with this bill. It does seem like what there is new options for illicit cannabis to come into Texas and to serve all these people that have been participating in the hemp market there. So I don't know. I'm sorry for everyone that is waking up today and wondering what comes next, because I know that there's a lot of that going on. What do you think, Mark?
Look, I mean, I agree with you that that is sad that people are going to be losing their jobs, and so I'm just trying to get rid of some of the glare here, and it's not the result that people wanted. I think though it's a good example of how you know expectations in this industry are just are continue to be off base, and people not understanding that uh that we what is rational never applies in cannabis. And you know Texas is a funny state, in it's got kind of a unique political situation, both with the way its lawmaking is structured, with the power that the governor and particularly the lieutenant governor have in that state. It's uniquely sort of structured the way things play out there. But at the same time, I would counter a lot of this with, this is all built on a loophole. And you may get some, and I'll probably get some nasty email for calling it a loophole, but it's a loophole. And it's there is risk in building an industry based upon a loophole. And particularly one where you're asking politicians to justify allowing psychoactive psychotropic drugs to be, or sorry, products, I should say, to be sold to the public without regulation, or with a certain level of regulation that doesn't quite sort of meet what other products are at. And it's possible, and some states are continuing to allow it, but it really shouldn't surprise a lot of people that a lot of states don't want that. And I think that a lot of the reason the reason why we're here today is because Congress hasn't moved on it, even though it's known about this problem for a while, because Congress can't do anything, and we kind of all agree on that. And it's only been until recently that states are really becoming aware of this. I don't want
Yeah.
to call it a
Well,
problem
well, so
because that's loaded.
let's
Anyway,
double click on this. Yeah, I'm going to interrupt you for a second and just say that what you're talking about is the power of politicians versus
Mhm.
the will of the people, and this seems to be the sort of theme across cannabis policy constantly, and this sort of recovery that the industry is trying to create in the hearts and minds of politicians who are holding on to reefer madness ideology from the past, because
Yeah.
the American people support adult use legalization, they support medical
Yes.
cannabis, they support access to cannabinoids broadly. And I think that the American consumer doesn't even really have an opinion on hemp versus cannabis, and they don't need to. Like that is not the calling of the American consumer to understand the complexity of the laws related to hemp and cannabis. My own husband is like can't wrap his head around it, and I work in this space, right? And and so this is like a perfect example, I think, of a few powerful politicians that have certain positions on what is right or wrong for their constituency getting to choose when really the people have a very different position. And I think that that's what Texans want is access. There's a lot of people and businesses that are enjoying access to cannabis, and now they're not going to have it anymore. That's the
Yeah,
reality.
but for better or for worse, I mean, that's the way America works. I mean, most people hate daylight savings time, but we still seem to have it because the farmer lobby wants it. I mean, and I'm not trying to be flippant, but I mean, you can make that complaint about a lot of things, and it is a, but yeah, but it's unfortunate because it is indicative of where cannabis is at and how for years we've been expecting, change. We've been expecting Congress to do the right thing, the DEA to sort of come to its senses about the sensibility of all of this, the presidents to make, change. But that doesn't happen because there's no political, there's the political will isn't there, and it's such a hot button issue, but it's also a low priority hot button issue. I'm sorry, Ben, I cut you off to make my little rant there.
well, no, it's kind of funny. It's it reminds me of this old this Chris Rock quote where he was talking about when like Siegfried and Roy got attacked by their tiger, and he was like, "That tiger didn't go tiger, or that tiger didn't go crazy. That tiger went tiger." It's like Texas just went Texas. Like I remember when like hemp THC started selling in Texas, and I was just so dumbfounded. I was like, this is happening in Texas? Texas hates cannabis. And it just kind of proliferated. And I never quite wrapped my head around why it was proliferating beyond this like 2-year cycle, but they never like took it into session. And I believe it was Dan Patrick that actually killed it last time around. So maybe it was just like not as important as this time. And yeah, but I think it's also important. It's not done, right? Like I know Greg Abbott hasn't proven to have like a huge spine against the lieutenant governor, but like maybe if he receives thousands of letters from veterans and consumers and business owners in the state, that maybe he'll consider vetoing this bill. Or lawsuits will certainly drop on the government's desk, and that could tie things up in potential like restraining orders and whatnot. And so what this all kind of like generally leads to is, like, what do we want to see and like how do we get there? Because what we lack in this industry is a singular voice, and we can't even decide what that voice is or where it needs to be or where it needs to align. And like, how do we make it big enough and strong enough to compete with these other lobbies that are in the marketplace? Like, we do have an effort where it's like we've been aligning with some of the alcohol voices, and that has been like oil and water with a lot of the hemp operators. They don't want to see, products go to alcohol, so to speak. They don't want to see the industry sold out to alcohol. But like how are we going to get this done if we're just constantly fragmented on all fronts. This isn't just Texas. This is at the federal level. This is in every state level. Like, people are constantly being surprised by the laws that are being passed in Alabama and Tennessee and you name it. And so I'm kind of at a loss, and I don't know if there's a question coming here. And so maybe I'll just kick it back over to Mark and see if he can muse on it.
Well, I think you're right, and I think it's not just with respect to hemp. I mean, the non-hemp side of things. What I mean, we were talking about this earlier. Is there's no good words yet. We got to come up with better vocabulary to distinguish hemp and non-hemp cannabis. Talking about confusion, but the non-hemp lobbies, I mean, have had that same problem for years. We have a number of different trade groups, all have built on different constituencies with somewhat aligned yet different, but still not totally aligned goals. And in an industry that doesn't have a lot of money to lobby, and has been focused on a lot of random things, instead of focusing all of its firepower on changing the narrative and getting legalization, you know, done. It's the only thing that's going to fix the non-hemp industry is legalization. Period. I mean, all these other changes, safer banking, all this other stuff it's all marginal. But yeah, I mean, Ben, you're saying this on the hemp side. I mean, I think it's the same thing. You've got different constituencies trying to push for different things instead of all aligning on one message.
But like, to Anna Ray's point, like, are we still definitively have sides after all this? Like, it's like hemp is very divided within hemp, right? There is material hemp, industrial hemp, and I think they deserve their own definition and category. And I think that's coming from what I've been hearing at the federal level. But then there's all the cannabinoids coming from hemp, and that is becoming very closely associated with cannabis, to the point where I watched a lot of the rhetoric being delivered last night, and there's this one story where this woman, God bless her, is like crying about her daughter who went through like cannabis hyperemesis or whatever that was it CHS. But she was describing her adult daughter that was in a legal state of Nevada, like consuming cannabis. Like, I'm like the lines are becoming very blurred around like what we're trying to make the public feel like passionate about.
Because it's like, what are we talking about? Are we centering on consumer? Are we centering on regulatory navigation from a business perspective and what you're allowed to do from a go-to-market, market by market, like legal allowance? So, people, consumers, yes, they don't see the difference. They're going to ingest a 5 milligram edible, THC edible, and whether it comes from hemp or comes from cannabis, likely their experience is going to be fairly similar. And how it gets to them and what the legal pathway is through the regulatory and legal kind of messes that exist for businesses and manufacturers are unique depending on where that consumer is standing and living. Interestingly, I think, like, pivoting to two of the larger legal cannabis markets, there are, I think, two different pretty important conversations going on in both California and New York that are worth talking about. New York has finally announced that it's going to be launching its track and trace program. And it's interesting, most states, when they launch either their medical program or their adult use program, the track and trace program launches at the same time. And New York took a different approach and launched the market without launching its track and trace program, with a stated intent that it would do so at a later date. And they signed a contract with BioTrack, which also was a divergence from the norm, which is most of the states have gone the way of metric. And they finally, after a couple years of having this program in place, have announced that in August is when the first track and trace requirements will begin for cultivators, and then they're going to month after month roll it out for different parts of the supply chain. September is when the manufacturers and I think distributors will need to come online, and then right after that, retailers will follow. And this is on the back of massive questions about product coming into New York from other markets and potentially it not being caught because there hasn't been track and trace in place. So it's been easy for folks to import and invert product from other markets. So I think that this is news because it could have a domino effect on other markets. Apparently, Oklahoma and California are the places that most people are saying that the extra product has been showing up in New York. I don't have any inside information to say who's doing this, but it's possible that track and trace could make a big difference.
Yeah, I don't know. I think diversion is happening in many places. I've heard of Michigan products showing up outside of Michigan. I just don't think it's going to stop. It's one marketplace, whether it's the illicit market, cannabis or hemp, like people are going to get the product and they're going to get hopefully quality product, but cheaper product when they can. And great that New York's doing this. BioTrack, sure, whatever. I also heard that they embargoed a bunch of Stizzy product, which is a challenge. But yeah, I don't know. I'm curious, like Marc, what are your thoughts on how these markets are evolving, and are any of them reaching kind of like a more viable state than the other?
You mean California versus New York?
Sure, let's
Yeah, I mean,
start there.
yeah.
We're all sitting in California, which is not helping our
Which is about as non-viable as it gets. I mean, certainly California is about, it's about as mature a market as it can get, both from a consumer perspective as well as the license perspective. It's been what, since 2016 is when we passed adult use.
We passed the law and then it launched 2018.
Launched 2018. I mean, it's about as mature as it gets, and I think it's really showing its cracks. From the fact that there are so few companies that are actually thriving here. But that happens in a lot of states where that sort of reach maturity, where you see this curve, in most states where you get, incredible demand to start, and then you have too much cultivation, and then there's too much product, but then eventually it flattens out because the consumers that are in that state who are going to be buying product from licensed dispensaries are fully being satisfied, and so you kind of reach this stasis, and it's basically a flattening to slight downturn of the curve, and that seems to keep happening in every state. New York is definitely on the upswing, and there, I mean, I don't need to repeat what everybody knows about the failures of the launch there, which it seems like it's getting better, with respect to crackdowns of illicit, unlicensed dispensaries, certainly in Manhattan. But from what I understand, it's still a problem. And yeah, I mean, and the problem of going back to what Anna Ray was talking about is about sort of products showing up in that state. It's I think that you're probably going to see less of it because of track and trace, because it's harder then to get those products into licensed dispensaries, and as the state becomes more successful at shutting down unlicensed dispensaries, there's going to be fewer places for those products to go. So
can
I
all
mean,
go to Texas now. Just
well,
as a side
you
note,
know,
the products can go to
just go to
Texas.
Texas.
So
Well,
New
yeah, I
York
mean,
will turn on track and trace. It will close off the import, and now there's a new
right.
opportunity for everybody. Yeah,
Well,
that is
right. I mean,
sarcastic. I don't know if you can all tell in my voice, but also
oh yeah.
maybe realistic and truth telling.
Well, yeah, that stuff's going to end up somewhere. It's going to still end up within the unlicensed market. It's just, but I think that it will, what New York is doing will likely have the effect of reducing acts. It won't be, it'll reduce its prevalence in licensed dispensaries. And with, hopefully fewer unlicensed dispensaries in New York. But yeah, it'll just get diverted, or I shudder to say inverted. I don't like that term, into the unlicensed market.
Hmm.
Sure.
So yeah, I mean, but yeah, I mean, if you walked into a dispensary 2 years ago in New York City, which were everywhere, you could see, branded products. I don't want to name names, but you could see branded products from all across the country. And it wasn't totally clear if those were actual, were those authentic products from another state, or were they just sort of stamped with that brand's name. It wasn't totally clear, but anecdotally, from what you heard, it was real stuff just being brought in from the other states. It was a huge problem.
So we're in an interesting place in the industry, right?
Mhm.
The cannabis industry is not super stoked with the reality that they're getting to live. In most cases, there's some states that are still in their first 18 months, and so they're enjoying it. Hello, New Jersey. Um, but then there's what the hemp industry is experiencing, and they're feeling like things are being taken away from them.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of cannabis operators are looking at what's happening in hemp, and they would just love a little bit of taste of that. And some of the brands are actually trying that. Some of the MSOs are trying it, and so I guess let me take this more in a personal direction, Mark. You've been doing this since 2018, so you've been through a lot of the ups and downs.
17.
2017.
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to.
Yes.
That's 7 years
One
in the
more
cannabis
year.
industry. So yeah, what keeps you enthused? Like, what are some of the bright spots for you? Like, what has you excited looking at the remainder of the year?
Oh, I mean, what has me excited? There's nothing that has me excited right now. And there are no bright spots.
Damn it. This is called high spirits, Mark.
Yeah,
Let's
there you
go.
I
go.
know. What
Hi.
the hell?
Yes. Um, I mean, I'm being slightly flippant, but not totally. I mean, it's I look, I love this industry. It is it's rare that you get to work, you get to focus your career on building something from scratch. And and helping people and working with and being one of the people to help sort of create a brand new industry, especially an industry that that ultimately is helping people. I used to poo-poo the idea that cannabis is medicine, but I've come to really understand that that you see you really are helping people with we are in what we're doing, and that's great. And this industry is so fascinating from an intellectual perspective, um because it's just so hard and so much of it doesn't make any sense. Trying to navigate the an industry that's both illegal and highly regulated at the same time is really hard, and it creates a lot of weird problems, both academic and sort of existential, as well as the practical problems of operating your business. And how do you navigate that? I mean, it's fun and it's interesting that way. um but at the same time, I remain fairly pessimistic about it. And so I go back to, like, there aren't many bright spots on the horizon, unfortunately. Particularly for non-hemp cannabis. It's not looking bright. And the few sort of lights we saw on the horizon with rescheduling, which would have eased ease the financial burden on the industry to a certain extent. It would have given a bit more of a vibe, sort of positive vibe to the industry is kind of fading. um and and the chances for any sort of real political action at the federal level these days are, I think, zero. I and plus the the competition from its sibling hemp remains a problem for non-hemp cannabis. And then it's they're kind of like stepbrothers in a way, where they're family, but they bicker a lot. Let's just put it that way. Um, and and you still, what other industry has an illicit market that's bigger than it, that continues to thrive? So yeah, I mean, I am serious when I don't honestly see any bright spots. Um,
You keep working in it every
I
day.
keep,
So
I keep,
I feel like what you're really talking about is the difference between like transparency, honesty, like not being in denial about reality,
yeah,
and spin. And so you're
yes,
talking about like balancing realism with actual, like, I guess, adaptability in the face of challenge, because
that's a good
I
way to put it.
I know you. I know that you are pretty resolutely focused on your work in the industry. You get up every morning and you think about what's happening. You are working on compromise in all kinds of ways, and you're someone that has a unique way of thinking about creating consensus and compromise. So I want to hear the honest truth of like what you think separates those that will fall victim to the crap that cannabis is facing, versus the people and the businesses that you think are going to make it through this, because we know cannabis consumers aren't going anywhere. It's just, yes, it's a tough business environment, but what separates the good companies and the good leaders from the ones that are not going to make it through this climate?
Um, no, it's a good point, and I'm optimistic about the industry in the long run, and there are good operators out there, and there are people who are succeeding in this. There are well-run businesses, and there's a lot of great people trying to make it work in the industry, in the face of just rampant, pessimism and a terrible overall, business environment for the industry. And I think what distinguishes those people are, from a business perspective, are tightness in the way they run their business, an incredible attention to margin, um, I treating their people right, in making this business work. Compliance is 98% of the game. Uh, and I think understanding what you want to be when you grow up, I is you. I've always felt that eventually this industry will be hourglass shaped, similar a little bit to the craft beer industry, or sorry, the beer industry, where you've got a handful of players at the top, who have a lot of the volume. You've got a lot of small players at the bottom who are local or hyper local, who are more focused on the connoisseur, or for lack of a word, snob. And you've got, and I say that lovingly, and not much in the middle. And and I think that to me, that shows that there's room in cannabis for both. There's room for big players who have a national presence and a lot of who have a lot of resources, to cater to a broad consumer base, but without a ton of typicity within their product. You got a lot of small, local craft producers who are out there for the weed snob, who are producing very sort of highly crafted product. And so to me, success is if you're not going to be the big one, and not everybody can be in the top, how do you find your place within that small niche? What makes you different? And it's really hard. It's easy to say that, but it's really hard in an industry where you've got a lot of brands, a lot of product. It's not that easy to distinguish yourself, and everybody's competing for shelf space. And it's hard to build a brand because advertising's really tough, if not almost non-existent. Um, and so, it's not. I mean, it's not that different from other CPG, but to me, that is where product, companies succeed and don't succeed, is what really makes them different in an industry where it's hard to differentiate yourself.
Yeah. I want to bring it back a little bit to the regulatory convergence, because you say hemp and non-hemp, and it feels a little bit like kind of stuck, right? We're stuck with these two different paradigms that are running in parallel. And in my world, I think a lot about the consumer, who we've already identified, really starting to see this as just, where can I get the cannabinoids that I want? And we work with a lot of beverage brands who, as a product category, have been the most fluid across the two different regulatory structures. You see a lot of brands operating in both. And then we have the MSOs, kind of jumping in, like I said, doing their thing. And so as we think about the future, is it even a potential that we see regulatory convergence? Like, I have my thoughts, and I'm queuing this up for you, Mark. And I think something that came up recently really makes it poignant for us here in California is there's this what's it called, the Rethink Cannabis movement, where it's like redefine a new voter initiative for the state of California to replace Prop 64. Now, if we could get it
aligned, that's what it's called.
Cannabis aligned. Sorry.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so if we could get past the whole, like, can we raise $40 million or whatever it takes to kind of push something like this across, like, how would we actually do it? Would we get hemp and cannabis operators in the same room? And, like, would we start looking at it as regulatory convergence? Could we set aside all the different capitalistic components to really think about, like, what is the vision of the future? Like, how do we get cannabis in all its forms to people?
Mm-hmm.
And I was saying this to Nina Parks, like, on LinkedIn. It's just like, I really want to ensure that we have all these voices equally represented when we have this conversation. It always comes down to, is like, how do we make decisions with all those, like, diverse perspectives? Because as we've seen in California, you can have some very powerful voices, representing just a few operators.
Yeah. I think it's I'm going to sound like an interview here. It's a great question. And I think that it's a great question, which I think the answer is a lot harder than people make it out to be. One of my beefs with the rhetoric from the hemp side of things is when, the argument that let's just all work together to figure this out. That's easy to say, but I don't, but it's rarely explained or articulated what that means, because a lot of the result is only really going to favor the hemp side of things. And because, how do you reconcile? And I don't mean this in an antagonistic way. I mean this in like in an academic and sort of like trying to think this through. What does that really look like? Because if you've got, if the point of hemp, that might be the wrong way to put it, but the point of hemp is that it's a federally legal product, and, with everything that's sort of wrapped up in that, and putting aside, FDA regulations and the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, putting all that aside, let's just, for the argument, it's a legal product, federally legal product. And so that means that, So does, but then you've got non-hemp that has, by state law, has to go through the full track and trace system and is subject to 280E and it can only be sold in dispensaries, licensed dispensaries. I don't know how you can feasibly reconcile those two.
So I mean, we have
And
examples, right? Like so, or at least examples trying. And Minnesota's the kind of the hallmark of the kind of bifurcated market. But one way to consider is like you have the cannabis marketplace where people are shopping for cannabis and cannabis alternatives, and then you have the low dose kind of hemp products that are in the mainstream marketplace where they might be perceived as alternatives to other products. And I'm going to always speak from the
yeah,
beverage perspective, right? Like you go into a
well,
bar,
yeah,
you don't want an alcoholic drink, but you'll take a hemp beverage drink and it's low dose. It's
yeah,
not the 100 milligram drink that you'll find in a dispensary, but it creates an opportunity for general access and normalization of cannabinoids to consumers, and like
yeah.
that could theoretically increase the whole pie for everyone.
Well, and that's a fair
But
point.
before
And
Mark,
oh, go ahead, go
before
ahead.
you respond, like Ben, what you're talking about is how we get there. I think Mark is talking about the challenges, but Mark, when you answer, I you have a lot of perspectives about how to build consensus because you have been getting deals across the finish line for a long time. And let's say this is the deal. This is like the biggest deal that there is for cannabis is like how we reconcile this.
Yeah.
You know that not everyone's going to win, right? Like there will be
Mhm.
winners and losers in this deal.
Right.
Like
Right.
how do you get everybody together and get a deal across the table? Like I
Yeah. I
want you
mean,
to wear your
yeah.
legal hat.
I don't get paid enough for that. I no, look, I mean, Ben, I take your point. It is fair, and I think that that's where you have to distinguish form factors. And I think what I'm getting at maybe more has to do with as you're distinguishing it between beverage and everything else. Um, where beverage for through dispensaries has always been, and as you know, has always been a very small part of the market because it's hard to distribute. It's hard for cannabis distributors to distribute, and dispensaries don't have a ton of shelf space. And so, or space to store it, whereas it is much more natural for the alcohol distribution system. Um, and all the Michigas that's wrapped up in that. Um, but so to me, maybe that's where the resolution comes out. Now, I mean, Minnesota's a funny place too because they also their law is in place because of a reported mistake by the legislature. Though I've also heard that maybe it really wasn't a mistake. So that's funny in and of itself.
I
But
think it was
it's
very deliberate. It just happened to
it,
be an oversight by certain voters.
yes, yeah. It was a mistake, but not really a mistake. It's which is nuts. But it's yeah. I mean, me. And to iterate. I mean, to your point. I mean, to me, maybe that's where the middle ground is found, where you are allowing certain beverages with that meet certain standards, and are properly licensed through a state system, that are sold through a certain license system. I mean, maybe it's the alcohol system, I don't know. That maybe that's the middle ground, whereas and then reforming and figuring out flower and all of that needs to remain within the license system. um there, because there isn't as much, to me, the threat, if that's the right word for it, to licensed non-hemp cannabis is more from flower, from the hemp flower and hemp pre-rolls and all of that. It's less so from beverage. And so maybe that's where it comes out. and as we talk about beverage, we're talking about, THC, hemp derived THC beverage. The whole sort of CBD is a whole nother ball of wax, but I don't think it's what you're getting at.
Ben,
I don't
last
know.
week you reflected on your experience in DC at Lobby Day, and one of the things that I came away from that with is that remembrance of how fast staff turns over in DC
Mhm.
and how fast the staff needs to constantly be re-educated about what these issues are and kind of all the meat that makes the sausage. And it occurs to me that this is just so nuanced that it's just so complicated for lawmakers who don't spend their days like we do in this sausage making to understand and
Yeah.
how we
Is
explain it and how we get them to understand is so important.
Well, my perspective is that it's kind of like organized chaos, right? Like everything that's happening across the states between cannabis and hemp is it's a big experimental testing ground for what needs to happen at the federal level. And Congress is designed to move slowly. Like this has been said to me every time I've been on the Hill. Like 15 years is like the general cycle of it takes to like really get something normalized and passed. And you might argue we've been at this for more than 15 years. But I mean, it's changed so rapidly, right? But
Mhm,
what I do recognize happening is the regulators have seeing everything that's going on in all these different markets, and they're talking to the legislators. And what we start seeing at the federal level is this understanding that's like, okay, you have hemp and you have cannabis, and you have hemp that's for industrial, and then you have hemp that's destined for cannabinoid extraction. And then we have the FDCNA, like Marc identified, right? And so like the FDCNA doesn't really have a definition for cannabinoids. And so what we need to make sure happens in the FDCNA is that we get a cannabinoid section, not a hemp section, not a cannabis section, a cannabinoid section. And like this is how we start to drive regulatory convergence. And in the meantime, it's going to just be pure fucking chaos, like at the state level, until we get clarity. But like all
yeah.
this chaos is what's necessary to have a rational discussion at the federal level. So, really high
Mhm,
level, I'm talking probably 100,000, feet instead of 30,000 feet. Like this is all like necessary for us to rewrite like the century of bad legislation that's been written.
mhm.
But it's going to be
It-
painful for a lot of
mhm.
operators, mainly dispensary
Yeah,
owners, I think. um,
I I think that's spot on. So sorry, I think that's spot on. And I think that goes back to um the title of this episode, which is that I think that the industry has been overly optimistic that change would just happen, that the regulators and the state governments and the federal government were going to see the light naturally, because that's what's rational and that's what's logical. And we kind of expected. I mean, how many times did we hear, oh, safer is gonna pass tomorrow, that's not a problem. And I think that there is a I think most of the industry now realizes the reality that the state and federal governments are not just going to hand this to us on a silver platter. And we need to be much more proactive in rewriting our own narrative as an industry. And I mean that both in industry, both non-hemp and hemp. How do we it's changing the minds of that sliver of politicians at the federal level who aren't yet willing to risk the political capital to make change. And at the state level, it's within each state, it's getting the regulators, not the regulators, the legislators, to recognize that the way that these laws have been drafted have been basically to isolate cannabis, and not really to give it the real tools it needs to be a viable industry, legitimate industry that it is. And how to so it's refocusing our efforts and changing those narratives about getting politicians minds changed.
A lot here. A
Fight
lot
the
here.
power or something.
A lot here.
Yeah.
So, Marc, do you have any predictions over what you think is going to be happening over the next 6 to 12 months in cannabis? There's so much discussion around consolidation and restructuring and debt cliffs that are coming with large companies.
Yeah.
What do you think is happening in the next 6 to 12?
Well, I think we will finally see a farm bill. Because I with the way, and I have no basis for this. I have no inside information. I just think that it's been long enough, and with Republicans controlling both houses and the White House, there will probably be more of an effort to finally get that done. So where that'll pan out, I have no idea when it comes to hemp, but I do think that we will finally see some sort of resolution on that. I don't think we're going to see safer paths still. I think that we are going to see uh, 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 more changes in more restructurings of debt with at these big companies with and smaller companies with dealing with this upcoming debt cliff that's coming in the next 12 to 18 months. I think it's going to be really hard for and I don't see a lot of change, a lot of substantial change within the industry. I think it's just going to be a lot of the same. And I do see a lot of your listeners who aren't yet subscribed going to cannabismusings.substack.com and subscribing for free to my newsletter. So that I do see. I also, before we go, I should have mentioned this at the beginning, that none of this this is all my own personal sort of statements. None of it reflects the opinion of Hardeen. And it's not legal or investment advice. I should have said that at the beginning. Thank you.
Good reminder.
It's all right. I can clip that and put it up at the front. Well, Marc, I really appreciate you kind of jumping on with us and allowing us to navigate these different sticky conversations. And
I love talking about this stuff, and I appreciate the opportunity and to talk to smart people about this stuff. So
yeah, well, as we head out, I want to give you an opportunity to take the mic and give us one last shout. So we call this our last call. It's your opportunity to give a call to action, a plug, shout out to someone, anything cannabis related or otherwise. So Marc, Hauser, what's your last call?
there's a Yiddish saying. I'm gonna probably mispronounce it because as much as I know Yiddish, my pronunciation is terrible. But it's hyphen be as a Bunkus, which means trying to pick up a dead body with cups, which was cupping, which was they years ago, they, as a medical procedure, they take hot like glasses or like a glass and put it on your skin to try to suck out the bad vapors and humors and stuff like that. And so there's something the saying is it's pointless trying to pick up a dead body with cups. And it's one of my favorite Yiddish sayings because it's just kind of nonsensical and weird. But to me, it encapsulates this industry, is that trying to really understand it is almost pointless. And instead, you just need to do it. You just need to embrace it. You need to just navigate it as best you can, but really trying to sort of understand it from a logical and perspective, it's just not worth it.
I love that.
And I say that lovingly. I say, and and what I love about it is it's so, Yiddish is such a loving, at the same time, loving and bitter language. And so, so it encapsulates my feelings about this space.
Yeah.
This concept of organized chaos that we've been kind of dancing around this episode is hilarious. And especially in light of you guys kind of making fun of me for being excited about going to the 60,000 person Dead and Company show in San Francisco in August. It sounds kind of the same thing. Like we just need to embrace the chaos and the crazy and just go for it. Let loose, man.
A little bit,
Well,
bit,
that's
and use the porta potties. Yeah.
Oh God. Yeah. Well, this is like you were just asking me at the beginning of the show. It's like, how's the week been? I'm like, I could say it was devastating, but really, it's expected in some sort of way. It's just the chaos that we get to live in
Yeah.
general. Like we can all look back and say it's like still kind of up and to the right. It's just a lot more volatile and crazy than we ever expected. But
Yeah.
Marc, really appreciate your time. Thank you so much, and
Thank you.
we'll talk to you soon.
All right.
All right. What'd you think, everybody? Big news week. A little bit of a deep dive there with Marc. Hope you liked it. Please like, subscribe, share, do all the things. Thank you to our teams at Vertosa and Wolf Meyer for keeping things going. And of course, our incredible producer, Eric Rossetti. If you enjoyed this episode, please drop us a review, comment on our LinkedIn, wherever you find us. As always, folks, stay curious, stay informed, and keep your spirits high. Until next time, that's the show.